Hi there, welcome to Canyons Church Online. It's no accident that you're here today, and we believe God has something special for you. Our heart is to create a space where you can grow in your faith, find encouragement, and connect with others, even if it's online. Feel free to grab your coffee, settle in, and take this time to focus on what God has for you. And if you have a question or need prayer, we're just a click away. Thanks for being part of our online family. Let's jump in.
Hey, good morning, Canyons. How are you doing today? Great. Hey, congratulations. You have reached week 4 and the final week of our Swipe Right series. And oh, what fun this has been. This conversation's all been about relationships, intimacy, and of course, sex, which, did you know that a lot of people are weirded out to hear their pastor talk so cavalier about sex? Like, in my mind, I'm a pretty regular person, but I know that for a lot of people, like, I didn't even know he knew that, right? Like, so yeah, let's just be grateful. This isn't like a how-to guide, right? So this is an important conversation though, because of how much energy and space the average person in our culture devotes to sex. Like, one of my mentors has this theory that I believe wholeheartedly, and that is we as a culture worship the goddess of sex. Now, when I say goddess, I mean like lowercase g. Now, for context, if you were to read through the Bible, here's what you would start to pick up on, is that a lot of the nations around Israel in the Old Testament and a lot of the cultures around Judea in the New Testament had these different gods that they worshiped. And so, like, you would go to the temple of Baal, or you would have, Artemis, or you would have, Athena, like just these different gods that regions would worship. And in our day and age, we don't necessarily have that level of religious fervor for these different gods. And so oftentimes we read stuff like that and we hear statements like I just made, and we think, well, that's a little antiquated because, most of you are not driving by the Asherah pole on your way to church on a Sunday. Like, that's something that was in the past. We're like monotheistic cultures now. Like, we don't really have all of these different gods. But I do believe that idolatry and worshiping other gods is actually alive and well. And one of the gods that our culture worships is sex. Now, case in point, one of the worst things that in our culture you could wish on another human being is that they would live their entire life and die a virgin, right? Like, that's something that we just that would be unheard of for somebody. And we believe that sexual expression is tantamount to like food and water, and it's a natural right. But I want to say publicly that if you choose to remain celibate, if you have no desire to marry, you're not a lesser person. In fact, the Bible would say that your potential in life is actually to serve God is greater than those who choose to marry. Like, the day I said I do to my wife, I kind of put a ceiling on like how much I could do for God. And why? Well, because she's holding me back, of course. No, that's not it. It's because in marriage, you have to submit to one another, which means that I can't just go and do whatever I want at any moment. I have to consider, how's this going to affect her? What does this do to our relationship? My evenings, I wish I could say I was sitting at my desk polishing this sermon to make it better, but I'm not. I'm trying to get 3 kids to eat, and I'm trying to have a conversation with my wife before we have to go to bed and do it all over again. And so the thing is, whenever you say yes to a relationship, you actually are diminishing a little bit of your potential to serve God. But at the same time, you're more than your sexual past, you're more than your sexual future, and we actually worship a man who chose to remain celibate into his 30s, and we call him Lord and Savior. And so, what I'm saying is nobody is calling Jesus less than. Nobody's calling him deficient or man, he just didn't really get to experience life to the full. My point is this. We often worship at the goddess of sex, but we also need to put it into its rightful place. But at the same time, sex, intimacy, relationships, it is a motivator for us. It's a natural craving that God is actually the one who put that desire into every one of us. He doesn't call us to live a monastic lifestyle where he says, no, I didn't want to put you into families. In fact, he orchestrated the very first marriage that we talked about a couple weeks ago, that sex is a gift that he has given to people. But it's been designed to work in a specific way and in a certain context. And he's communicated how it can allow itself to work best. And what we've learned over the last few weeks is that past mistakes have led to immense scars and baggage. We've learned that sometimes people experience the pain and the anguish of scars that were thrust upon them that they had no choice in at all. And we've talked about how to navigate some of those emotions and some of the things as we work through incredible topics like that. Others are in marriages that feel like they're not going anywhere but down. Others are trying to navigate the dating scene. And it feels like you're walking through a living room where the lights have been turned off, you can't see anything, and somebody has rearranged the furniture, and you're trying to figure out, how do I navigate a world like this? And I also just want to acknowledge that over the last 3 weeks, as we've been talking about this, that a lot of the conversations and the topics and just, the issues that we have discussed have the potential to be very guilt-inducing. And people maybe sit back and they think, well, Matt, that's really cool, and I would have loved to have heard this when I was young, or I would have loved to hear this 10 years ago, but I still want to dive into this and have this conversation. Why? Because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And there are those that maybe need to hear this on the front end of life, or maybe they need to be reminded of this as they hit midlife, or there's people that just, I want to do things differently from this point forward. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there's always this tension within me as the communicator, as I'm up on stage, to try and resolve the tension. Just knowing that a lot of us have histories and pasts that are full of wreckage as we've made the wrong decisions and done things maybe outside of God's order. And the tension I feel is that I want everybody to feel at ease and comfortable. But the thing is, I can't always just resolve a tension that God has said, no, there still needs to be a little bit of that tension there. The Bible never tells us to reconcile tension that God is comfortable leaving. And of course, where that leaves us is that hurting with hope still hurts. So the tension we live in is that it's always better to do things God's way, and yet God can always make a way where there was no way, even if you haven't always done things his way. And so today, as we start this final week in this conversation, what we're going to be talking about is if you want to make changes in your life. And the great thing about this is this applies to the topic at hand, but it also applies to any other topic that you want to see growth and change in. That's what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to spend most of our time in two primary passages, Galatians chapter 6 and Judges chapter 16. And so while you are looking this up right now or pretending to look it up while you're secretly just scrolling Instagram, the title of today's talk is Magic Beans and In-Betweens. And it's definitely inspired by that episode of The Office where Jim sells Dwight a bag of magic beans and not the Jack and the Beanstalk, fairy tale. So if you remember The Office, which, if you do, you are blessed. If you don't, get a Peacock subscription this afternoon and start it. You will be much happier with yourself. Okay, so if you remember in this episode of The Office, Jim sells Dwight a little packet of magic beans where Dwight then goes and plants them, and then when Dwight's not looking, Jim replaces the beans with like a fully grown stalk. You're right? It's immediate. And we'll talk about that more in a minute, but here's where we're going to start. Galatians 6:9 says it this way. So let's not get tired of doing what is good. Can everybody say tired? Tired. At just the right time, we'll reap a harvest of blessings if we don't give up. Here's the qualifier. If we don't give up. I think that the majority of you in this room right now can agree you want to do the right things. That's why you're at church, probably, right? Like you want to do the right things. You want to make the right decisions. You want to do things God's way. I think that if that didn't include 100% of the people in this room, I think this next one will. We all want to reap harvests of blessings, right? Like we want all the right things. We want all the good things. So we want to do the right things. We want to receive the right things. And here is what Paul, the guy who wrote this to the church in Galatia a couple thousand years ago, says. You can get that, you can do that if we don't give up. But see, most of us, we don't want to do the thing that takes a long time. What do we want? We want magic beans. We want to be able to plant it and immediately see growth. We want cures that are painless and inexpensive. We want things fast. We want a harvest of blessings for doing the right thing the very first time. And it's kind of like, you know what? I've been dieting all afternoon. Why don't my jeans fit better? Like this is the culture that we live in. All right, have you ever heard the term honeypot? Now, I have 3 little kids, so I immediately think of Winnie the Pooh. And, I guess that's kind of true. Pooh does get his head stuck in a honeypot. But it's when something looks really attractive, but it's actually a scam. When I was the pastor, or when I was the executive pastor at a large church, I would get emails a lot that would look like they were from our lead pastor, Brian. And it would say stuff like this: Matt, this is Brian. Can I get money from you? Send to bank code here. Right? Like, and it's like you look at the email address, it was stealmoney6969@hotmail.com, and you're just like, who's doing this? So like that's an easy to spot scam. But then there's scams that are just like the next level up. Where if you're on social media and you're a dude, you start getting these like friend requests or like Instagram follows from what are seemingly attractive women, or they start to send you DMs and you're just like, all right, like I know this is some dude in Thailand, but like, it's looking a little bit more legit. But the thing that always gets me is like, I'll have 5 or 6 friends who are also like mutual friends of this person. I'm like, do we not see what's going to happen here? I heard a story once, though, about one of these honeypot scams where a guy went to Shanghai. And while he's walking the streets, he would just have, like, women repeatedly walk up to him by the dozen, just asking, sexy massage? You want sexy massage? He's like, no, thank you. So finally, like, after the 12th time, he goes up to his guide, and he's like, what is the story here? And this guy's like, well, here in China, prostitution is illegal. But a lot of like foreign businessmen, they think that maybe like there's some sort of, backwardsness in this. And so these women, not being able to be upfront about what they're doing, will offer a sexy massage. And usually these wealthy foreign businessmen will take these women up on it. They'll go back to the hotel. And after the sexy massage, the doors will bust open and a group of men will come running in with cameras and threatening. You take us to an ATM right now, you drain your accounts, you give us the money, or we will turn you over to the Chinese government. And they just get these guys by the hundreds. That is a honeypot. It looks really good, but in the end, it's going to lead to death. So in Judges chapter 16, we're going to read about a story of a dude who ran head first into a honeypot. Samson was a judge of Israel. And if you're not too familiar with just the way the Bible was arranged, you hear judge and you think like Judge Judy or like the People's Court. And it's like, well, is that a big deal? Well, when we read judge, what you really should read is he was a warrior. And in fact, he was like a superhero in Israel's history. His stories are like comic books. You come at him with 10 dudes, 10 dudes are nothing. 50, he pushes 50 off, before breakfast. 100, well, man, like 100 guys cannot stop him. And so what we learn is that his otherworldly strength that he has, his ability to win in a fight, is completely supernatural, that God is empowering him. And the way that it starts is that his parents had made a promise when he was born that he was going to be what's called a Nazirite his entire life. Now, this was a commitment that people would make 3,500 years ago to not touch alcohol, not cut their hair, that kind of stuff. But most of the time, people would make a Nazirite vow for a short period of time. So it's like, hey, for the next 3 months, or the next 40 days, or for the next year, I'm taking a Nazirite vow. But for Samson, it was going to be his entire life. And so, of course, one of the markers of the Nazirite vow was that you're not allowed to cut your hair. So not only was he super strong, not only was he an incredible warrior, he also just had these big flowing locks of hair. And the thing is, as long as he was committed to God, his strength would remain. And on the battlefield, Samson could not be touched. And the enemies of Israel, and namely enemies even in the spiritual realm, like the devil, realized that when it came to the battlefield, Samson was untouchable. And so instead of the war room, they shift their strategy. We're going to take him out in the bedroom. And here's the thing, this is a principle for all of us. If the devil can't take you out in the bedroom, he might try a different strategy. He might try the boardroom. His goal is to get you to compromise somewhere. He's like a woodpecker looking for the soft spot in the trunk. Or he's like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, like looking for the weak spots in the fence. Like, we're going to try the lust of your flesh. Does that not work? No, okay, we'll try the lust of your eyes. Okay, if that doesn't work, then how about the pride of life? The goal is we want you to compromise somewhere. That is the devil's strategy. And so for Samson, he lacks self-control with a honeypot by the name of Delilah. And as if you read through his accounts in Judges, you see like it's incredibly obvious. At no point do you think, I think this is on the up and up. No, she is like very clearly trying to steal his strength, trying to get him to stop. But Samson's resolve to love God and to love other people was always secondary. And it was always secondary to what was right for him in the moment. And in this case, it was his craving for sex with Delilah. So here's what happens. In Judges 16, it says this: Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap. And then she called a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. And then she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. And when he woke up, he thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he did not realize the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him, and they gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. I mean, you can feel the despair in the story. He must have been at a loss. Everything that he'd been able to do in his past, he was no longer able to do. The Lord had left him. He squandered this incredible gift. God's power had left him. You know, the thing is, I have the opportunity to hear a lot of stories and get to know a lot of people, and I hear the same story happen all the time, just with different characters and sometimes a little bit different plot line, where maybe it looks like this. You were born into an incredible family. Mom and dad give you everything on a silver platter. You had all the clothes you needed, you got the car, they sent you to college, but it was wasted and it was squandered. Or a guy who's blessed with an incredible family, and it's an incredible wife, beautiful kids, but he has an affair and he squanders it. Or the person who lands a great job but chooses dishonesty and squanders it. And the thing is, in every one of those situations, whenever the gift had always been there until it was taken away, months can pass, years can pass, sometimes decades, and the immense amount of guilt still has not lifted. And you just have that same chorus going through your brain of if only if I had said no, or only if I hadn't gone to the party, or if only I hadn't invited him over, if only I hadn't hit send, if only. Now, this may seem insignificant, but in Samson's story, this is huge. It says this in Judges 16:22. But before long, his hair began to grow back. Now, I want to be very clear. The power is not in his hair, okay? Like, it wasn't like, well, you know, it is long and luscious. He is pretty good on the battlefield. But it's what his hair represents. And for Samson, there is now hope. The hair is growing back. And Jesus' commitment to us is burning hot. Jesus says there is healing for our past mistakes. That often when you make that huge mistake, the hair can start to grow back. Restoration for things that are lost. Redemption for the story of a hopeless mess. But for Samson, there is still the aftermath of a new reality. His hair begins to grow back. But to be clear, his eyes don't grow back. And what you might find is, as you're on the other side of really big, massive mistakes, is that your past decisions, the situation, the circumstances, the consequences, they prevent you from ever going back into that old career, or they prevent you from ever going back to your spouse. It's going to be a while before your kids trust you again. You have emotional scars that are now really sensitive tissue, and you're just never going to look the same again. And the reality is there is new hope for some, but there are new realities for others. But here's the thing I want you to know. Even when the consequences remain, God can bring greater praise out of even your darkest days, even more than you can imagine. I love this quote by author Max Lucado. He says, "You're going to get through this. It won't be painless, it won't be quick, but God will use this mess for good. Don't be foolish or naive, but don't despair either. With God's help, you'll get through this." So with that, let me read you Galatians 6:9 again. "So let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessings if we don't give up." So don't give up. We want fast. First, it was the microwave. Then it was the internet. Now it's the internet in our pockets. Do you remember when you used to buy things online or on a catalog, and it would take 6 to 8 weeks to arrive? And everything was reset when suddenly it could come in as fast as 2 weeks. But now our expectations are, if it doesn't come within the next 2 days, or God forbid by the end of today, I am going to be so irate that it didn't get here in time. And the thing is, Paul, the author of Galatians, he is writing, don't give up, don't get tired, don't lose patience, to a culture that needed 3 months to send a message 100 miles. So if that was true for them, don't give up, don't lose hope, don't become impatient. It is doubly patient for us today. And why? Because change is not fast. What changes do you want to see in your life? What future do you want to protect? I find that the harvest is a perfect metaphor for this. Because we need to remember, when you want to make a change in life, whether it's, I was going the world's way, but now I'm going to go God's way in relationships. And I'm not going to do things the way I used to. Or if it's I haven't really been walking with God, but I know he loves me, and I know he's saved me, I know he's forgiven me of my sins, but I've never really gotten into a habit of spending time with him. Or maybe it's I just get so caught up in worry or anger, and I want to make the changes. I find that a harvest is the perfect metaphor for it. And here's the thing about planting anything, is that when you plant a seed, seeds start small. Whether it's an acorn that turns into an oak, or the seed that eventually becomes a vast forest, the commonality is you take a little seed and you plant it in the dirt. It's going to start small. Jesus once uses a mustard seed as an illustration of faith. He's the kingdom of God is a lot like a mustard seed that grows into a large tree. And the thing is, this tiny little seed, the mustard seed, would grow into a tree that was 20 feet tall, 20 feet in its height and spread. And the message of this is, faith can take something tiny and turn it into something massive. And it's not just belief, it is action. It is trust and obedience. Now, the other truth about seeds is that they can be planted for good or for bad. In Song of Solomon, which is also an Old Testament book, there's this warning about catching what's called the little foxes before they spoil the vine, before they destroy the vineyard. And the idea is the foxes would get in, they would start nibbling, they'd start getting away, they would allow things to happen. And eventually what was going to be a great harvest is now ruined. Why? Because of the little foxes. Something so insignificant, something that you seemingly thought was not a big deal, was allowed to run amok. And here's what this means. Small compromises snowball. Small compromises now become bigger problems later. Now, Samson's problem was that he didn't actually catch the little fox. Okay, well, if you want to technically, he did catch some foxes, if you know his story. I mean, like, nerdy Bible trivia for 500, Alex. Like, he does catch some foxes in his story, but the point being is, like, in his own life, he allowed little compromises to just happen. He just was cool with it. I mean, as you read through his story, here's some things that you learn, is that as a Nazirite, he wasn't allowed to touch alcohol. But some of the details in his story is he'd be taking leisurely strolls through the vineyard, and that wasn't because it was like a shorter distance. It's because grab a glass of wine while you walk from this place to this place. He wasn't supposed to, but he's like, nobody is ever going to know. You know, as a law-following Jewish leader, there was a pretty strong prohibition. You cannot touch a dead thing. But then as he's walking along one day, he's like, oh, I see some honey inside this dead lion, which is a weird place to try and find honey, by the way. But he just finds this honey in a dead lion, and it says that he scoops some out. These are all things that he thought nobody was ever going to know. But small compromises lead to bigger disasters. And so here's the thing. You might be hearing this and thinking, well, why didn't God take away his strength then? It's because God's patient with you. God is kind to us. We make mistakes all the time, and if God was going to like smite you as soon as you made a decision the first time, we would all be gone a long time ago. But God is so kind to us, and God was so kind to Samson. I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance. But Samson was planting the wrong seed. As it goes into the dirt, he learns the wrong lesson. Rather than learning, man, God's been so good to me, he learns, I think I can get away with it. I think that I can do things a different way and still maintain my gift and maintain my abilities. And here's what you need to know. Small concessions become small compromises. And small decisions eventually snowball into big habits. We need to know the devil is not playing checkers. He's playing chess. He finds where you will compromise, and he will allow you to do it so you can let it grow. Here's something just like back to our bigger topic of intimacy. Here's just a fundamental fact about intimacy. Intimacy always wants more. Do you remember when you were 13 and you held hands with a girl for the very first time? It was amazing until it wasn't. Your first kiss, world-changing, amazing, until it wasn't. And that's because intimacy always wants just a little bit more. And the way that God has designed intimacy to work within the confines of marriage is that, yes, once you are committed to this person, you can allow intimacy to go as far as it wants. But the danger is you start operating outside of God's way. It's always going to be asking for a little bit more when, frankly, it's just going to snowball into a big habit or a big problem later. So let's just pretend that you are like me and you take the Bible seriously, you want to protect your sexuality. Like, here's a rule that, like, I had to input because I just started to, like, realize some things about myself. That when Jen and I started dating, we just had a rule, like, we're never going to spend time in my apartment alone. Do you know how many times, like, I wanted to compromise on that for, like, very innocent reasons? You know how cheaper it would have been to, like, just eat food at my place rather than, like, going out to eat every single night? Or, like, you know how much cheaper it would have been to, like, find our entertainment by playing a game inside the apartment by ourselves than it was to go and find something out in the city. But I had to put these in place because I just know this is a true thing about intimacy. It's a true thing about me. It's that intimacy always wants a little bit more. And boundaries are only good if you choose to honor them. And so here's the thing. If you have bad habits, if you've done the things the wrong way, you're not just going to shake those instincts overnight. Yet most people, we don't want this answer when it comes to trusting the process for change. That what we want are magic beans. We want to plant that seed and immediately see changes. And be like, I did it this time, now we're all good. But here's the thing, you cannot despise small beginnings. It's all about firsts. If you want to lose weight, it's all about that first dessert that you pass up. It's that first time you pay a little extra on that credit card to get yourself out of debt. It's that first time you actually hold the boundary when you're on the date. You can't change your past, but you can change your future. And it starts by putting your seed into the dirt and trusting. It might be small now, but eventually it'll start to grow, which leads to the second point. All seeds grow slow. So you start to see after a while, like, man, something has finally started to come up. And like, you didn't expect it to be what it is. You weren't expecting it to go slow, but like, man, after a while, you start to see some progress. You know, a few years back, Bruno Mars, the recording artist, was on 60 Minutes. He had played the Super Bowl twice. He'd won several Grammys. His songs have millions of downloads and views. And so they were asking about his song, Uptown Funk. I'm like, how long did it take for you to write this song? He's like, it took me a year. 1 year. If you're not familiar, it's not a very long song. Apparently, it was in the trash 10 times. He thought this is never going to be good, but he kept working on it. Slow growth. You know, in his story, we found out that at one point he was homeless. He was living out of his car. He grew up in Hawaii, and at one point he was living in this stone house with no bathroom. In fact, didn't even own it, just squatting there. And they asked him, like, what decisions have you made to lead to being success? Because you've come up against incredible problems. He's like, it's being dedicated to my craft. It's spending thousands of hours in the studio trying to get it just right. It's teaching yourself to sing and then teaching yourself to sing better. It is slow growth. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Outliers, popularizes the 10,000 hour rule. And if you're not familiar with it, that is, if you practice something for 10,000 hours, eventually you will master it. And the thing is, we recognize this in almost every area of our life, except when it comes to our instincts, our habits, and our behavior. What we want are magic beans. We want instant. And here's the thing about seeds. Often you plant it and it looks like there's no progress. There's no fruit, it's just seeds in the dirt. And maybe you see a little bit of green, but it's not much. It's not encouraging. But not all growth is visible. You know, one of the things that actually will heal sexual scars is some of the things that prevent them. It's careful living every single day. It's being careful not to reopen the old wound. Sociologists say it takes 21 days of repeated actions to make a new habit. Others would say it's way more than 21, it's 60. Others would say it's not even 60, it's like 120 days, but eventually something clicks. I liken it to showering. I'm assuming that most of us are in the same boat. You don't usually finish a day and go, oh my gosh, I was supposed to shower today. How did I miss that? And the reason why is because like at some point when you were a kid and you didn't want to take a bath, your parents forced you to take one anyway, and eventually it becomes something that's so ingrained in your routine and your habits that you don't even have to tell yourself to do it. You just naturally like, I don't know why, I'm just taking my clothes off right now and getting in the shower. Like, it's just part of your life. And the thing is, new habits require slow growth, which goes to this. Seeds start small, seeds grow slow, and obviously, like, I can only fit so much in a box, but eventually, like, seeds sprout out until eventually you have something. What I'm asking is, like, don't despise small beginnings. Eventually, the growth will come. One of my new favorite verses is Isaiah 60:22 that says, I am the Lord, and in its time, I will do this swiftly. You don't know the length of the process, but God can turn something overnight that you've been investing in for years. I heard the story recently about Himalayan lilies. It starts like this unassuming clump of leaves. In fact, here's what it looks like right here, and it stays like this for a long time. In fact, the only growth you get for like 5 to 7 years is this. It's 5 to 7 years of just watering, fertilizing, caring for it, trying to get it in the sunlight. And you just think, like, it's not working. This is not working. Like, I'm not seeing anything. I'm not seeing anything. But here is the beauty of the Himalayan lily. And it's the beauty of the Christian life, is that progress isn't always visible. You think it's not working. You think that nothing is taking. But God has written into the genetic code of the Himalayan lily that it lays dormant for like 5 to 7 years. And then all of the sudden, it's like something goes off. And what you can't see even in this picture is that these rise about 10 feet into the air and they produce these beautiful flowers almost overnight. And from where you're sitting right now, especially after feeling all the shame of the last few weeks as we've talked about this topic that the majority of the people in this room have probably compromised at some level on. And you sit there and you feel like Samson. You think your head is shaved, your eyes are gouged out. There is no hope for my future. But today is a new day. Maybe you need to plant your seed and expect God to do what you can't do on your own. Or maybe you have been planting and you've been watering and you've been caring and you've been pruning it. You've been fertilizing. And here's the thing about fertilizer is it stinks, right? But don't lose heart. Keep dreaming. Do the work. You will reap a harvest of blessing if you don't give up. We stick with the plan. See, I want things to go fast, right? We want to grow things fast, but they largely don't. You want to see changes in your life? There's no magic beans. There's only a commitment to the in-betweens. The thing about trusting God is it starts small. And it's like, this isn't going to be of any significance. I'm going to try this, and I don't think anything good's going to come out of it. And then eventually you start to see some growth, but it's still not like amazing. It's not blowing you away. It's not making the world go, ooh, wow, But then eventually something starts to click, and things start to change. If you want to see that change in your life, don't despise the small beginnings. If you want to see victory over some areas that have been like habitually going in the wrong direction year after year after year, don't lose heart. Keep doing the right things. In due time, you will receive a harvest of blessings if you don't give up. Now, the reason why this is even possible is because Christ didn't give up on us. As Jesus went on to the cross and as he put the nails into his hands and into his feet and he was laid into the grave, he didn't give up. He didn't call on the angels to rescue him. He didn't ascend off of the cross. He said, no, I'm going to not give up so that the showers of blessing can come to those that I love. And so there is not a point within our lives where we should lose heart and say, it's too hard, it's too much, I can't keep going. God will empower you. God will give you the strength. He will give you the victory that you need. And it might not look as linear as you wish. It's not 3 steps forward and only forward. It might be 3 steps forward and 1 step back. It might be that today I'm only doing this little thing, but I'm going to trust that as it's watered and nurtured and cared for, God will allow it to grow. And the victory that you assumed would never come eventually does. So let me pray for you. Let me pray that God will give us the victory that we need. God, you are a God of small beginnings. That you've asked us to plant the seed and trust that you will do with our possible the impossible. The God that you will be the God of growth. That as we keep doing the right thing, that you will give us a harvest of blessings if we don't give up. And so God, I pray for the crowd that is here today. That God, as we are wrestling with our pasts, as we're wrestling with our presents, and as God, we are curious about our futures, that you would fill in the empty spaces, the God that you would connect the dots, that that you would do the impossible with our possible. God, I pray for those who have just feel so overwhelmed with past mistakes, that God, you would remind them, you can restore what was lost. That there might be new realities, but you can bring greater praise out of those darkest days. God, I pray for those who have been looking for freedom and victory in life. That God, that you would grant them the desires of their heart. That they would not get stuck in their past. They wouldn't get stuck in their old habits and their past mistakes. But God, you would rewrite their instincts. You would rewrite their habits. God, I pray that you give us wisdom on what boundaries we need to place. And the God, that you would nurture and care for the seeds that are planted, that you would allow the growth to happen, and God, that you would allow it to sprout and grow. And so, Lord, I pray this all in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.